Stone giants once dictated the fate of nations from their silent perches. The true chessboard of medieval power was not the open field, but a network of hidden fortresses, their strategic placement literally redrawing the maps of influence for centuries. Why have these pivotal strongholds, from coastal sentinels to mountain citadels, vanished from our collective memory? By the end of this journey, you will possess a new lens for reading history, seeing past kings and battles to the hidden architecture of control that shaped a continent. What forgotten truths lie buried in the stone of a single, abandoned wall? A king's authority was written not on parchment, but directly onto the land itself. True power in the medieval world was a deeply local phenomenon, rooted in the control of specific, critical pieces of geography. It was less about owning vast, empty expanses, and more about commanding the key points that made those expanses valuable. Think of a river not as a blue line on a map, but as the primary highway for goods, news, and armies. The lord who controlled the only safe crossing for miles did not just own a bridge, he owned a choke point on commerce and movement. He could levy tolls on every merchant's cart, dictate who entered his domain, and halt an advancing army in its tracks. That single point of control generated more tangible power than a dozen villages in the open countryside. This logic extended to mountain passes, the narrow gateways between valleys and kingdoms. A fortress built to guard such a pass could remain supplied under siege for months, while the army waiting below starved in the cold. It controlled the very rhythm of trade and conflict, deciding when the gates were open and when they were sealed shut. This is why the placement of a stronghold was its most profound strategic statement. A castle overlooking a fertile valley was not just a noble's residence, it was the engine of local economy and law. From its walls, the lord could protect the farmers who worked his land, ensuring his food supply, while also using the threat of his garrison to collect taxes and enforce his rule. His reach was defined by the distance his soldiers could march in a day from that central, fortified point. This system created a fragmented tapestry of power, a patchwork where influence was measured in strategic locations, not contiguous borders. The map of a kingdom was less a solid color and more a collection of dots, each dot a fortress, a town, a crossing. The lines connecting them were the roads and rivers, the vital arteries that these strongholds protected. To understand why a fortress was built where it was, is to understand the very blueprint of medieval power. It reveals what a king or a lord truly valued, what he feared, and how he sought to impose his will on a wild and contested landscape. Perched on the windswept cliffs of Cornwall, where the sea pounds relentlessly against the rock, Tintagel stands as a ghost of a very different kind of power. We often picture medieval strongholds as classic stone castles with high walls and moats, but Tintagel defies that image entirely. It was a fortress of a much older, more primal kind. Its primary defense was the land itself, a headland severed from the mainland by a deep, man-made ditch. To reach it, you had to cross a narrow and easily defended land bridge, a natural choke point that made this place a near impregnable citadel long before the age of knights in shining armor. This was the seat of the post-Roman kings of Dumnonia, a dynasty that ruled this corner of Britain as the light of Rome faded. Their power was not measured in vast armies alone, but in control of a resource as valuable as gold, tin. From this high cliff, they commanded the western sea lanes, watching over the ships that carried this vital metal to the wider world. Tin was essential for making bronze, the backbone of tools, weapons, and commerce. By controlling its trade, the rulers of Tintagel wielded immense economic and military sway over a vast coastal region, their influence stretching far beyond what their immediate territory might suggest. Yet today, Tintagel is almost entirely enveloped by the mists of Arthurian legend. The romantic tales of King Arthur and his knights have, over centuries, painted over the stark reality of this place as a functioning seat of power. Its true legacy as a strategic stronghold that helped shape early British kingdoms has been obscured, buried under layers of myth. This is a theme we will see again and again, where the practical history of a fortress is forgotten, replaced by a story that, while captivating, hides the tangible reasons it was built upon such an unforgiving piece of earth. The stone foundations that remain whisper not of wizards and round tables, but of trade, taxation, and the hard calculus of controlling a coastline. While Tintagel's power was rooted in the sea, other fortresses sought their strength in the sky. High in the Alborz mountains of Persia, the citadel of Alamut was carved into the very peaks, a place so remote it was known as the Eagle's Nest. This was not a castle designed to control trade routes in the traditional sense. Its power came from its terrifying inaccessibility. Reaching it required a grueling climb up narrow paths where a single defender could hold off an army. From this seemingly impossible perch, the leaders of the Nizari Ismailis, a group often remembered as the Assassins, built a reputation that shook empires. They did not command vast fields of soldiers. Instead, they mastered the art of influence through fear and precision. Their network of mountain strongholds allowed them to challenge the authority of the Seljuk Turks and later, the seemingly unstoppable Mongol war machine. How could such a small state exert so much pressure? Their power was psychological. The mere knowledge that Alamut existed, that its devotees could strike from anywhere with unwavering loyalty, became a weapon more potent than any army. Sultans and generals found that their own influence could be crippled not by a lost battle, but by the constant, gnawing fear of a single, well-placed knife. This fortress demonstrates that medieval power was not always about holding land, but about controlling the narrative. Alamut's legend, a mixture of fact and frightening rumor, allowed it to project a shadow far larger than its stone walls. It forced the world's most powerful rulers to look up at those distant, impregnable cliffs and wonder if their own courts were truly safe. But a fortress built on fear could still fall to sheer force. Far from the mountain eyries of the Assassins, a different kind of stronghold rose from the chalk cliffs of Normandy, one so advanced it was meant to be the final word in defense. Château Gaillard, the saucy castle, was the defiant project of Richard the Lionheart, a king more at home on the battlefield than in his own court. He needed to secure his French territories from the constant threat of the French king, and he chose his spot with a master's eye. The castle was not built on a distant peak, but on a critical bend of the Seine River. This river was the main artery into the heart of Normandy, the primary highway for all trade, news, and invading fleets. By planting his fortress here, Richard controlled the very pulse of the region. He could, with a simple command from its walls, strangle the flow of goods to his enemies or permit his own supplies and armies to move freely. It was a choke point of immense strategic value, and he built a castle to match. Constructed in an astonishingly short 2 years, Château Gaillard was a masterpiece of military architecture. Its design was revolutionary, with concentric walls, rounded towers to deflect siege engine shots, and a host of innovations meant to make any attacker's life a misery. The name itself, Saucy Castle, reflected Richard's utter confidence in its strength, a boast carved in stone against his rivals. For a time, that confidence seemed justified. But its eventual fate would prove that no fortress, no matter how brilliant its design, is truly eternal. After a grueling, months-long siege that tested the limits of both attacker and defender, Château Gaillard fell. Its capture was not just the loss of a single castle, it was a seismic event that shattered English dominance in Normandy and dramatically shifted the balance of power in France. The fall of this one river gate fortress demonstrated with brutal clarity that the destiny of entire regions could hinge on the strength of a single, well-placed stronghold and the determination of those who sought to breach it. Yet the fall of one mighty fortress often meant the rise of another in a different corner of the world. Far to the east, where the Mediterranean coast meets the Syrian hills, the Krak des Chevaliers stood as a monument to a different kind of ambition. This was not the stronghold of a single king, but a sprawling military machine operated by the Knights Hospitaller. It was less a castle and more a fortified city, a concentric maze of towering walls and deadly choke points that could house a garrison of 2,000 soldiers. Its sheer scale was a statement of permanent occupation, a declaration that its builders were there to stay. Its power was derived from its absolute command over a geographical feature known as the Homs Gap. This was not a simple mountain pass, but a vital corridor, the only easy route for armies and trade caravans moving between the Mediterranean coast and the vast Syrian interior. By planting this colossal fortress directly in this gap, the Crusaders held a knife to the throat of regional commerce and military movement. They could, at will, allow the flow of goods and levy taxes, or they could slam the gates shut, severing the interior from the sea and blocking Muslim armies from reaching the coastline. For nearly 200 years, Krak des Chevaliers was the ultimate symbol of Frankish power in the Levant. Its presence alone forced every neighboring ruler to recalculate their every move, its shadow stretching for miles across the landscape. It was a fortress so formidable that its reputation for invincibility became a weapon in itself. How do you challenge a power that seems carved from the very bedrock of the land? Its story, however, reminds us that even the greatest strongholds are not just military puzzles, but social and economic engines, their true strength lying as much in the roads they control as in the walls they build. High above the Baroque spires of Salzburg, a fortress of pale stone seems to grow directly from the cliffs. Hohensalzburg is a colossus, one of the largest medieval castles to survive completely intact, yet its true purpose is often lost behind its picturesque facade. This was not the stronghold of a typical king or duke, but the seat of the prince archbishops, men who wielded both a bishop's crozier and a prince's sword. Their authority was a dual force, governing the souls and the lands of their subjects from this mountain throne. The fortress was their ultimate instrument of control, a physical declaration that their power was both divine and unassailable. But the real secret to their centuries of independence lay not in the stone walls themselves, but deep underground, in the mines that produced a substance as valuable as any currency: salt. In an age before refrigeration, salt was the white gold that preserved food, dictated health, and fueled economies. The prince archbishops did not just own a few salt mines, they commanded the entire trade network for this essential resource. The wealth that flowed from those mines filled the treasury vaults secured within Hohensalzburg's walls, financing a court of immense sophistication and a military force that could defy emperors. This economic might allow them to navigate the complex politics of the Holy Roman Empire as near equals to secular kingdoms, their fortress serving as both a spiritual symbol and an impenetrable bank. The sheer scale of Hohensalzburg was a constant, looming reminder to every merchant and every rival ruler that the true power here was not just spiritual, but built upon a foundation of literal salt. From the salt-rich peaks of Hohensalzburg, our journey descends to the shifting sands and sea of Normandy. Here, the line between the divine and the defensive blurs into one breathtaking silhouette. Mont Saint-Michel rises from the tidal flats not just as an abbey, but as a masterpiece of strategic deception. For centuries, pilgrims saw a holy sanctuary reaching for the heavens, while military commanders saw an island fortress that was nearly impossible to conquer. Its primary defense was not a man-made wall, but the ocean itself. Twice each day, the tide would rush in with terrifying speed, transforming the surrounding bay into a treacherous, impassable moat. Any army caught on the vast mudflats during this surge would be swallowed by the sea. This natural phenomenon made the mount virtually impregnable for large portions of the day, a fact that defined its role in the long, brutal conflict of the 100 Years' War. While the English captured and fortified almost every other stronghold along the Norman coast, Mont Saint-Michel held out. Its garrison, a mix of monks and soldiers, became a persistent thorn in the side of the English war effort. From this sacred rock, they launched swift raids in small boats, harassing English supply barges and disrupting communications between their coastal holdings. The Mount was not a passive refuge, it was an active naval outpost, its presence ensuring that a key stretch of the French coast remained defiantly beyond English control. The repeated, costly, and humiliating failures of English forces to storm this tidal citadel slowly transformed it into something more than a fortress. It became a potent symbol of French national resilience, a beacon of resistance that refused to be extinguished. Its enduring defiance proved that power could have two faces, the spiritual authority of the abbey intertwined with the unyielding strength of its fortifications. This was a place where faith was literally fortified by stone and sea, a combination that secured a crucial corner of a kingdom. A king's ambition can be poured into stone, and nowhere is that more visible than at Caernarfon. This was not merely a castle, it was a deliberate, crushing argument built at the edge of the sea. Edward I of England, a monarch determined to finally subdue the rebellious Welsh princes, chose this spot with ruthless precision. Caernarfon Castle guards the mouth of the River Saint, the very gateway by which the heart of the last independent Welsh kingdom, Gwynedd, could be reached and strangled. From this position, English ships could sail right up to the castle walls with men and supplies, while the Welsh, cut off from the sea, were trapped inland. But Edward's vision went far deeper than military logistics. He was building a symbol meant to dominate the mind as well as the land. Look at its famous polygonal towers and the strange, banded masonry of its walls. This was not a random architectural choice. It was a direct imitation of the legendary Theodosian walls of Constantinople. Edward was consciously linking his own reign to that of the Roman emperors, casting himself as the heir to a timeless imperial authority. He was telling the Welsh and the world that his rule was not just another chapter in a local feud, but a new imperial age. Caernarfon was just one link in a chain, a strategy Edward called his Iron Ring. A circle of formidable castles, including Conwy and Harlech, was thrown up around the Welsh strongholds, not just to contain the enemy, but to overwrite their very presence on the land. These were permanent seats of English government and military power, embedded directly into the Welsh landscape. They were instruments of a slow, deliberate conquest that worked by controlling all movement, all supply, and all symbols of authority. The old power map of Britain, one where Welsh princes ruled their mountainous domains, was systematically erased and redrawn by this ring of stone. The fall of a single fortress could shift a border, but the construction of this network shifted the destiny of an entire nation, proving that the most lasting conquests are often those built not just to win a war, but to end the very idea of resistance. While Edward I was forging his iron ring from stone and imperial ambition, a very different kind of fortress was taking shape deep within the forests of Slovenia, a stronghold that seemed to defy the very principles of architecture. Predjama Castle is not built upon a cliff but within one, its white walls seamlessly merging with the gaping mouth of a massive cave. This was not a statement of royal power, but a masterpiece of survival, a fortress that used the land itself as its ultimate shield. In the 15th century, this impossible castle became the lair of the rebellious knight Erasm Luger, a man who dared to challenge the Holy Roman Emperor. When imperial forces came to crush him, they surrounded the castle, confident that a traditional siege would soon force his surrender. They were wrong. For over a year, Erasm and his men taunted the besieging army from the cave mouth, while the imperial troops sat in the valley, slowly exhausting their supplies. The defenders thrived. The secret was the labyrinth of natural tunnels that stretched for miles deep into the mountain behind the castle. Through these hidden passages, Erasm could receive food, send messages, and even launch surprise attacks on the enemy camp before vanishing back into the stone. The castle was not just a defensive position, it was a gateway to an entire underground world that his enemies could not reach. This allowed a single knight to hold an entire imperial army at bay, controlling the vital trade route that passed below his rocky perch. His power came not from thick walls or a large garrison, but from an intimate knowledge of the terrain, weaponizing the very geography to create a pocket of resistance that centralized authority could not stamp out. The story of Predjama is a stark reminder that in the chess game of medieval power, the most dangerous piece was not always the queen or the castle, but the pawn who knew the board better than anyone else. How many other strongholds owed their enduring power not to grand designs, but to such hidden geological secrets? 4 months. That is all it took to build a weapon that would bring an empire to its knees. While Predjama Castle used hidden tunnels to defy authority, the fortress of Rumelihisarı was authority itself made visible, a declaration of intent carved in stone on the European shore of the Bosphorus. The Ottoman Sultan Mehmed Roman II, a man of relentless ambition, did not build this stronghold to guard a pass or a river. He built it to sever a lifeline. Its cannons were positioned with one devastating purpose: to control the narrowest point of the strait and cut the great city of Constantinople off from any hope of rescue by sea. From its walls, a great iron chain could be stretched across the water to the older fortress on the Asian shore, creating an impassable barrier for any ship trying to reach the besieged Byzantine capital. This was not a vague threat, it was a precise surgical chokehold. For centuries, Constantinople's legendary walls had repelled every land-based assault, but its survival had always depended on the sea. By mastering the Bosphorus, Mehmed did not just surround the city, he isolated it completely, turning the very waters that had been its source of strength into a prison. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 was the event that shook the world, marking the end of the Roman Empire and the explosive rise of the Ottoman Empire as a global power. And at the heart of that victory was not just the massive cannons that battered the walls, but the silent, looming presence of Rumelihisarı. It stands as perhaps the ultimate example of a fortress built for a single, world-altering objective. Its power was not in enduring for centuries, but in being perfectly placed for one critical moment, proving that the most transformative strongholds are those that understand not just geography, but destiny. Far from the cannons of the Bosphorus, a different kind of power was being carved from the southern African plateau. The wind whispers through towering, curving walls of granite, their stones fitted together without a drop of mortar. This is Great Zimbabwe, a fortress city that was the heart of a kingdom built not on conquest alone, but on the control of continental commerce. While European lords built castles to dominate river crossings, the rulers here commanded a network that stretched from the gold-rich interior all the way to the bustling Swahili coast. Their authority was written in the sheer scale of these ruins, a complex of enclosures and towers that served as the administrative and spiritual center for a vast trading empire. Imagine caravans laden with gold, ivory, and exotic animal skins moving along ancient paths, all flowing toward this single, powerful hub. The wealth that passed through its gates was staggering, financing a sophisticated society and allowing its rulers to project influence over a huge region. This was not a fortress designed to withstand a siege in the traditional sense. Its immense, freestanding walls were a statement of permanence and prestige, a declaration of economic might so profound that it needed no moat. Its power came from its role as the ultimate regulator, the place where the riches of the land were gathered, taxed, and sent onward to the wider world. How could such a pivotal place simply vanish from history? After its peak, a combination of environmental shifts and the slow redirection of trade routes led to the city's gradual abandonment. The stone walls remained, but the memory of the kingdom that built them faded, lost to the outside world for centuries. European colonizers who later stumbled upon the ruins refused to believe Africans could have created such a masterpiece, attributing it to Phoenicians or even the Queen of Sheba. This deliberate erasure meant that Great Zimbabwe, a stronghold that once rivaled the commercial power of any medieval state, became a forgotten capital, its true story buried under layers of prejudice and time. A king's paranoia can become the mother of architectural genius. High on a monolithic rock column in the heart of Sri Lanka, the fortress of Sigiriya rises with an audacity that defies belief. This was not a stronghold that grew slowly over time. It was a single, desperate, and brilliant vision carved into the sky. In the 5th century, King Cassioppa, a man who had seized the throne through a coup, chose this 200-meter-high rock as his new capital. His motivation was pure survival, a need for a fortress so secure that no rival could ever reach him. The approach to his palace was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Visitors and potential attackers alike would first climb a series of steep staircases, only to be confronted by a breathtaking and terrifying gateway, a massive pair of lion's paws carved from the living rock. The path to the summit once wound directly through the mouth of a colossal stone lion, a design meant to overwhelm any who approached with the sheer, terrifying power of the king who dwelled above. This was more than a defensive feature. It was a statement that the king was not merely a man, but a force of nature. From this impossible perch, Cassioppa exerted absolute control over the fertile plains that stretched to the horizon. His gaze from the palace gardens at the summit was the gaze of a god, surveying the agricultural heartland that fed his kingdom and financed his rule. The real marvel of Sigiriya, however, lies not just in its height, but in its sophisticated infrastructure. This was a fully functioning royal citadel, complete with advanced, symmetrical water gardens at its base. These were not merely decorative, they were a complex hydraulic system of moats, canals, and pressurized fountains that provided water for the garrison and cooled the palace complex, a display of engineering prowess that rivaled anything in the ancient world. The fortifications were woven into the natural shape of the rock, creating a seamless blend of nature and military might. Sigiriya represents a unique and often forgotten pinnacle of medieval South Asian power, a fortress palace built from one man's fear and ambition, which for a brief, glorious moment became the unassailable heart of a kingdom. The legend of Masada casts a long shadow across the centuries. Though its stone foundations were laid and its famous siege concluded long before the medieval age, the idea of this desert fortress never truly died. Perched on an isolated rock plateau in the Judean desert, its sheer cliffs rising hundreds of feet from the barren earth, Masada was the very definition of a final refuge. Its power was not in its beauty or its trade routes, but in its terrifying inaccessibility. To reach its summit was a grueling ordeal, a climb along a narrow, winding path known as the Snake, where a handful of defenders could rain death upon any army struggling up the slope. This was a stronghold that traded everything for one thing: absolute security. It represented a desperate, last-stand kind of power, the belief that a ruler or a rebel could retreat to a place so remote, so defensible, that they could simply outlast any threat from the world below. And while the physical fortress was ancient, this powerful idea was timeless. Medieval strategists and chroniclers remembered Masada. They understood its psychological potency. A ruler who held such a place was not just safe, he was untouchable, his authority magnified by the sheer impossibility of his position. This concept of the ultimate sanctuary, a citadel that seemed to defy the very laws of conquest, directly influenced the choice of locations for later strongholds. You can see the ghost of Masada in the mountain aeries of the assassins, in the remote Welsh castles of the native princes, in any fortress built on the premise that some places are so harsh, so difficult to assault, that they grant a form of immortality. The power of such a place lies as much in the mind of the besieger as in the strength of its walls. It forces an enemy to ask a terrible question: is the prize worth the certain, bloody cost of even trying to take it? For generations of rulers and rebels who felt the walls of the world closing in, the memory of that desert rock offered a blueprint for defiance, proving that sometimes the most formidable defense is simply being out of reach. A fortress can be a beautiful lie, its true purpose hidden behind ornate arches and tranquil courtyards. The Alhambra in Granada is the ultimate example of this deception, a place celebrated today for its breathtaking beauty, yet born from a desperate need for survival. Before it was a palace, it was an alcazaba, a stark military citadel crowning a strategic hill known as the Sabika. This was the final, beating heart of the Nasrid Emirate, the last Muslim kingdom in Iberia. While Christian armies reclaimed the rest of Spain, the rulers of Granada fortified this hill with a simple, brutal logic. From its walls, they commanded a direct line of sight over the entire city below, and beyond that, the Vega, a vast, fertile plain that served as the Emirate's breadbasket. Control this hill, and you controlled the food, the water, and the very air of the kingdom. For more than 250 years after the rest of Al-Andalus had fallen, the Alhambra held out. Its longevity was not an accident. It was a masterpiece of integrated defense, a city within walls that combined barracks, towers, and royal residences into a single, self-sufficient entity. Its famous palaces, added later, were built within this protective shell, a testament to a culture that refused to surrender its sophistication even under the shadow of imminent collapse. The delicate stucco work and serene reflecting courts were a deliberate act of normalcy, a declaration that life, art, and governance would continue, protected by the formidable military machine that surrounded them. This delicate balance between beauty and brute strength allowed the Nasrids to navigate a precarious existence, playing Christian kingdoms against each other through diplomacy and tribute, all under the unwavering gaze of their sentinel towers. But all such delicate equilibriums must eventually break. The final siege of Granada in 1492 was less a dramatic assault and more of a slow, inexorable strangulation. The Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella set up their own royal camp in the city they named Santa Fe, the Holy Faith, a direct challenge to the mountain fortress. They understood that to take the Alhambra was to take a symbol, and they were willing to wait. The eventual surrender was negotiated, not fought to the last man. The last Nasrid Sultan, Boabdil, handed over the keys to the city and rode into exile. The fall of this one fortress did not just mark the end of a dynasty, it slammed a door shut on nearly 8 centuries of Islamic presence in Western Europe. The map of the continent was fundamentally redrawn, not just in territorial lines, but in its religious and cultural identity. The Alhambra's transition from a seat of Muslim power to a trophy of Christian conquest is a stark reminder that the most enduring strongholds are those that encapsulate an entire world within their walls, a world that can, in a single moment, vanish forever. A fortress of brick and faith rose from the flat plains of the Vistula Delta, a sprawling complex so vast it seemed to be a city carved from a single red stone. Malbork Castle was the ultimate headquarters of the Teutonic Knights, a monastic order of warrior monks whose power rivaled that of kings. This was not merely a defensive structure, it was the beating heart of a state, a place where the lines between chapel, barracks, and treasury completely dissolved. The sheer scale of the place was its primary weapon. As you approached, its walls seemed to stretch on forever, a man-made mountain of brick designed to overwhelm the senses and crush the spirit of any potential adversary. It was the largest castle in the world by land area, and every inch of it was calculated to project an image of unshakable divine authority. From this central nerve center, the knights administered a vast territory, controlling the flow of goods and souls with equal fervor. Their power was funded by a monopoly on the amber trade and absolute control over the Vistula River, the great commercial artery that connected the Baltic Sea with the interior of Europe. Every merchant barge sailing down that river had to pass under the gaze of Malbork, and the knights ensured that a portion of its wealth flowed directly into their coffers. This economic might finance their endless crusades against the pagan tribes of the Baltic, campaigns that were as much about territorial expansion as they were about religious conversion. The castle itself was a machine for war and governance, with granaries to feed thousands, workshops to supply an army, and a grand refectory where the business of state was conducted between prayers. How does a single fortress come to dictate the destiny of an entire region for centuries? Malbork was the anchor of the Teutonic Order's influence, a brick and mortar declaration that shaped the political and cultural landscape of Prussia and the Baltic lands, its shadow so long that it still falls across the map of modern Europe. Yet even the grandest brick citadels could not match the defensive genius of a city carved directly into the heart of a mountain. In the rugged southern reaches of Georgia, the cliff face of Erosheti Mountain hides a secret world. Vardzia is not a castle built upon the land, but a fortress excavated from it, a sprawling labyrinth of 13 levels containing over 6,000 apartments, chapels, and throne rooms, all hidden behind a single, unassuming rock wall. This was the visionary project of Queen Tama, one of Georgia's greatest monarchs, who in the 12th century commanded her engineers to hollow out the mountain to create a sanctuary that was also a strategic masterpiece. The entire complex was designed as a self-sufficient stronghold, a vertical city that could shelter as many as 2,000 monks and soldiers for months on end. Its primary defense was its anonymity. From a distance, the hundreds of cave entrances blended into the natural stone, making the fortress nearly invisible to any invading army marching through the river valley below. How do you besiege a mountain? The Seljuk Turks, a powerful empire pressing from the south, repeatedly found themselves baffled by this very question. Their vast cavalry was useless against the sheer cliffs, and their attempts to scale the rock face were met with rocks and boiling pitch poured from hidden openings. Vardzia was more than a barrier, it was a vigilant sentinel on a critical frontier. Its presence secured Georgia's vulnerable southern border, acting as a shield that allowed the kingdom's golden age to flourish in peace. Within these stone-hewn halls, the fusion of spiritual and military power was complete. Monks prayed in exquisite chapels adorned with fading frescoes of the Queen herself, while soldiers stood watch in chambers that overlooked the entire approach route. A sophisticated network of tunnels connected the deepest sanctuaries to hidden escape routes and a reliable water supply, an underground aqueduct that channeled fresh spring water to every level. This ensured that even under the most dire siege, life within the mountain could continue. Vardzia was not just a fortress protecting a border, it was a civilization protecting its soul, a hidden ark preserving the art, faith, and identity of a nation against the tides of invasion. Its enduring stone whispers of a kingdom that did not just build upon the land, but retreated within it, finding strength not in towering walls, but in the silent, unassailable heart of the earth. Centuries after knights laid down their swords, the logic of the medieval stronghold continued to dictate the fate of nations from the cold waters of the Baltic. Anchored across 6 islands at the very gateway to Helsinki's harbor, the sea fortress of Suomenlinna rises from the granite bedrock. Though its sturdy bastions were built in the 18th century, its strategic soul is purely medieval. This was not a single castle, but a sprawling network of interconnected islands, each one a fortified link in an unbreakable chain. Their collective purpose was to create a defensive barrier, transforming a wide naval approach into a single, deadly funnel. Any ship seeking the safety and wealth of the harbor had to first pass through this gauntlet of cannons, its fate decided long before it saw the city. This is the enduring power of the choke point, a principle as old as Tintagel or the Krak des Chevaliers, simply translated from the mountain pass to the open sea. The nation that commanded this gateway did not just own a fortress, it held a remote control for Baltic commerce and conflict. From these windswept ramparts, its rulers could project influence across the entire region, deciding which fleets could resupply, which merchants could trade, and which armies could move by sea. The fortress itself was a self-sufficient world, with its own docks, barracks, and granaries, capable of withstanding a prolonged blockade while it enforced one of its own. The story of Suomenlinna proves that while military technology evolved, the fundamental geography of power remained stubbornly constant. The medieval map, drawn in strategic dots and controlling lines, was simply redrawn onto the waves, a hidden architecture of control that continued to shape empires long after the age of castles had supposedly passed. The logic of the fortress did not end at the sea, but stretched across the shifting sands of the Sahara. Sun-baked and magnificent, the towering earthen walls of Ait Ben Haddou rise from the dry riverbed like a mirage given permanent form. This was not a single castle, but a Kay-Sar, an entire fortified village built from the very earth it stood upon, a community woven into a single defensive fabric. Its strategic purpose was not to block an army, but to fuel an economy. Ait Ben Haddou was a vital bead on a long, fragile string, the caravan route that connected the fabled city of Marrakech with the vast, gold-rich empires south of the desert. For the traders navigating this sea of sand, the Kay-Sar was an oasis of security. Its high walls and single, easily defended gate offered protection from bandits and rival tribes, a place where exhausted men and their precious camels could rest, resupply, and trade in safety. The power of its rulers was measured not in the size of their garrison, but in the wealth of the goods that passed through its gates. They controlled a critical segment of this trans-Saharan network, a choke point on commerce where they could levy taxes on every ounce of salt, every block of gold, and every bolt of fine cloth. This control over the lifeblood of continental trade granted them influence that reached from the heart of the desert to the courts of sultans. Ait Ben Haddou stands as a stunning reminder that the medieval power map extended far beyond the forests and castles of Europe. Here, in the heart of Morocco, a kingdom was built not on stone but on mud brick, and its authority was written in the tracks of the caravans it sheltered. Its enduring preservation allows us to see a different kind of stronghold, one whose purpose was to enable movement and generate wealth, proving that the architecture of control could be as fluid and adaptable as the trade winds themselves. Rising from the Harima plain like a white bird taking flight, Heimji Castle was a masterpiece of lethal elegance. Its brilliant white plaster walls and graceful, tiered roofs earned it the name White Heron, yet this beauty was a carefully crafted illusion. Beneath that serene exterior lay the heart of a brutal and efficient military machine, perfected during Japan's long, bloody Sengoku period, an era of constant warfare between rival feudal lords. The castle's primary defense was not its walls, but its mind-bending approach. The path to the central keep was a deliberately confusing maze of winding, narrow courtyards and heavily fortified gates. Any attacking force would be channeled into these deadly corridors, forced to make sharp turns under the watchful eyes of defenders perched high above. They would be funneled into killing zones, their formations broken, and their momentum shattered long before they ever caught sight of the main tower. This was defensive architecture as psychological warfare, a stone puzzle designed to disorient, delay, and destroy, but Heimji's power extended far beyond its formidable walls. Its strategic location was chosen with the same ruthless calculus as any European stronghold. From its elevated position, the castle's lords, the daimyo, commanded a panoramic view of the entire Harima plain, a vital agricultural region that provided the rice and wealth to fuel their armies. More critically, they controlled the intersection of key roads, the very arteries of communication and trade for Western Japan. To move troops or goods through this crucial corridor meant seeking the permission and paying the toll of the Lord of the White Heron. The survival of a fortress like Heimji through decades of civil war was not a matter of luck. It was a testament to its perfect design and strategic value. The daimyo who managed to hold such impregnable strongholds amassed not just land, but unshakable political influence. Their survival meant they were still players in the great game when the tides of war began to turn toward unification. The network of castles that dotted the Japanese landscape became the chessboard upon which the nation's future was decided. The lord who ultimately succeeded in uniting Japan, Tokugawa Ieyasu, understood this power intimately. He recognized that to control the country, one must first control its key fortresses. The survival of Heimji and castles like it directly determined which feudal families retained the power and territory to become the building blocks of a new, unified state. Their stone foundations literally formed the platform upon which a shogun could stand to rule a nation. How many other turning points in history were decided not on an open battlefield, but by the silent, enduring strength of a fortress gate that never opened to an enemy? Its skeletal ruins still dominate the Slovakian horizon, a ghost of white limestone sprawling across two entire hills. Spiš Castle was not merely a border outpost, it was a statement in stone, one of the largest fortified complexes ever built in Central Europe. Its sheer scale was its primary language of power. Within its vast walls, a garrison of hundreds could be housed, trained, and supplied, a standing army that allowed the Kingdom of Hungary to project its authority far beyond the castle's own ramparts. This was not a passive shield, but an active fist, capable of striking deep into the surrounding territory to secure a volatile frontier. Its strategic genius lay in its placement on a critical continental seam. The castle stood guard over a vital trade corridor, a land bridge that connected the amber-rich Baltic coast with the spice-scented markets of the Mediterranean. Every merchant caravan moving between these two worlds had to pass under the gaze of Spish, and the Hungarian crown ensured that a portion of that immense wealth flowed into its own treasury, financing the very garrison that protected the route. For centuries, this symbiotic relationship between military might and economic control made the castle the unshakable cornerstone of Hungarian royal power in the north. It first served as a bulwark against the ambitions of the Polish kingdom, its presence ensuring that the mountainous borderlands remained firmly under Hungarian control. Later, as a new and greater threat emerged from the south, Spish transformed into a crucial defensive node against the expanding Ottoman Empire. Its enduring strength allowed the Hungarian kings to secure their flank, focusing their military resources elsewhere while this northern giant stood watch. The true power of Spish was not just in its ability to repel armies, but in its constant, looming presence that dictated the flow of both commerce and conflict for generations. How does such a pivotal place become a ruin? A devastating fire in the 18th century left the castle a hollow shell, its political purpose fading as borders shifted and new empires rose. Yet its silent stones continue to map the forgotten architecture of a kingdom's reach, a colossal footprint on the land that once connected two seas. Geometry became the new language of power in the waterlogged fields of the Netherlands. There, in the province of Groningen, a fortress was drawn not just on a map, but directly onto the landscape itself. Bertange is a star, a perfect geometric shape carved from marshland during the brutal 80 Years' War. Its design was a product of the Renaissance, a response to the new threat of cannon fire, with low, angled walls designed to deflect artillery shots. But its soul, its fundamental reason for being, was purely medieval. This star fort existed for one simple, ancient purpose: to control a single road. That ribbon of dry ground was the only reliable supply route through a vast and treacherous bog, a natural choke point that entire armies depended upon. The power of Bertange was absolute, not because of its cannons, but because of the swamp that surrounded it. Any commander who held this fortress controlled the only key to the region, deciding which troops could march, which supplies could pass, and ultimately, which side could sustain its war effort. To capture Bertange was to unlock the entire province. To lose it was to be stranded in the mire. Its perfect, star-shaped preservation today is a frozen moment in the evolution of the stronghold. It demonstrates with stunning clarity that while the designs changed from towering stone keeps to low geometric patterns, the underlying principle remained unaltered for centuries. The real fortress was not the brick and earth of its walls, but the invisible, strategic value of the terrain it commanded. This was the enduring chessboard of power, where a single point of control, whether a mountain pass, a river bend, or a road through a bog, could still dictate the fate of a conflict, proving that the oldest lessons of geography were simply being redrawn with a more precise mathematical hand. Stone fortifications are often painted with the colors of their conquerors, but some mountains refuse to be defined by a single flag. Carved directly into the steep, grey flanks of the Drino Valley in Albania, Gjirokastër Castle is a fortress that feels less built and more grown, a natural extension of the mountain it crowns. Its origins are rooted in the rivalries of medieval Albanian feudal lords, powerful families who understood that the valley below was not just a scenic route, but the primary corridor linking the Adriatic coast with the mountainous interior. The lord who commanded this fortress held the key to the entire region. He could watch over the movement of goods and armies from his towering perch, his authority literally looming over everyone who passed beneath his walls. This was not a place of fleeting power, but of enduring strategic necessity. The very geography that made it vital to Albanian princes also made it irresistible to the expanding Ottoman Empire. When the Ottomans arrived, they did not destroy the castle. They absorbed and expanded it, layering their own formidable architecture onto the medieval foundations. For centuries, Gjirokastër became a crucial Ottoman administrative and military center. Its cannons still pointed at the same valley, its gates still controlling the same vital artery. This seamless transition from one empire to another reveals a profound truth about the architecture of power. While kings and sultans rose and fell, the strategic value of the Drino Valley remained a constant. The fortress itself was the prize in a relentless tug of war, its possession signaling who truly held the keys to the Balkan landscape. How many soldiers marched through that valley, looking up at the same unblinking stone walls, each wave serving a different master but obeying the same unchanging geography? Gjirokastër's long history is a testament to the fact that the most coveted strongholds are those that command not a moment in time, but a permanent feature of the earth. A fortress can be a sanctuary, and its walls can be made of faith. High above the plains of Thessaly in Greece, the rock pillars of Meteora rise like the petrified columns of a forgotten giant's temple. These are not hills, but sheer vertical shafts of stone towering hundreds of feet into the sky, their summits flat and isolated from the world below. Beginning in the 14th century, hermit monks sought not just solitude, but absolute security on these impossible perches. Their defense was the void itself, a dizzying drop that made any notion of a conventional siege laughable. Access was a terrifying gamble, a journey in a net or basket hauled up by a creaking rope and windlass system, or a climb up a series of retractable ladders. This was not merely a retreat from society, it was a strategic withdrawal from an unstable world increasingly dominated by the expanding Ottoman Empire. The monasteries became arks designed to weather the flood of conquest by simply rising above it. Their power was not military but cultural. While Ottoman governors administered the lands below, the communities perched on these stone fingers operated as autonomous spiritual states. They became the guardians of a heritage under pressure, their libraries filling with priceless manuscripts, their chapels adorned with vibrant frescoes that preserved the techniques and theology of Greek orthodoxy. In a very real sense, these were fortresses protecting not territory but identity. The art created within these rocktop sanctuaries was not just for devotion, it was an act of defiance, a declaration that a culture would not be erased. The isolated power of these monastic centers created a unique map of influence, one invisible to the occupying authority. Their network, connected by faith and a shared secret language of ropes and baskets, formed a parallel world of spiritual authority that no sultan could effectively tax, control, or dismantle. How do you conquer a people when the heart of their culture is suspended in the air, just beyond your reach? The endurance of Meteora proves that the most resilient stronghold is sometimes not a castle meant to defy armies, but a sanctuary built to preserve a soul. Water is a moat, a highway, and a shield all at once. In the heart of Lithuania, a sea of freshwater cradles an island of red brick and ambition. Trakai Island Castle rises from the serene surface of Lake Galve, its reflection a perfect, shimmering double of its power. This was not a fortress built for a local lord, but the very heart of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, a state that at its peak was the largest in all of Europe. Its island location was its primary genius, a natural defense that made any direct assault a nightmare of naval logistics. An enemy would first have to cross the water under a hail of arrows and stones just to reach the outer walls, a costly and demoralizing endeavor before the true siege had even begun. But the castle's purpose was far greater than mere self-preservation. It was the central node in a vast network of control. From this aquatic throne, the Grand Dukes commanded the vital trade and military routes that connected the riches of the Baltic Sea with the sprawling, resource-rich interior. Every merchant carrying amber, fur, or wax, every diplomatic envoy, every marching company of soldiers moving between these two worlds had to pass through the lands overseen by Krak. The castle was the ultimate regulator and protector of this flow, its presence guaranteeing the security that allowed the Grand Duchy's economy and influence to flourish. Its formidable silhouette was a constant, visible symbol of a centralized authority strong enough to bind together a vast and diverse territory, from the Baltic coast to the edges of the Black Sea. How does a single fortress help secure the borders of such a massive state? By acting as an unshakable administrative core. The taxes collected from the trade it safeguarded funded the armies that secured the frontiers. The treaties signed within its halls dictated the fate of neighboring principalities. Krak was the stable, fortified center from which the Grand Dukes could project their power outward, facilitating an expansion that reshaped the entire political landscape of Eastern Europe. Its strength ensured that the map of the region for a critical period was drawn from an island in a lake, a testament to the enduring power of a perfectly placed stronghold over both land and water. The desert sun bleaches the very memory of water from the earth, yet here, in the heart of the Iranian plateau, an entire city was conjured from mud and straw. The citadel of Bam, the Arg-e, was not just a fortress within a city, it was the city itself, a sprawling labyrinth of sun-baked clay walls rising from the stark desert plain. This was one of the largest adobe complexes ever built by human hands, a colossal structure that served as the ultimate caravanserai on the ancient Silk Road. Its defensive walls, thick and towering, did not simply enclose a palace or a garrison, they protected a complete urban society. Within its fortified perimeter, thousands of people lived, worked, and traded, their entire world sheltered by the same immense ramparts that guarded the wealth of empires. The sheer scale of Bam was its first and most powerful statement. To a caravan approaching after weeks in the barren desert, its silhouette on the horizon promised not just safety, but civilization itself. Its power was not drawn from a mine or a river, but from the map. Bam sat directly on one of the most critical arteries of global commerce, the only reliable route through a vast and perilous desert. Control this point, and you controlled the flow of silk, spices, and ideas between the East and the West. The rulers of Bam became immensely wealthy not by conquering distant lands, but by mastering the economics of passage. Every merchant caravan laden with goods was compelled to stop here. They paid taxes for the privilege of entering its gates, they purchased supplies from its markets, and they paid for the protection of its garrison from the bandits that haunted the surrounding wastelands. This fortress city was a machine for generating revenue, its prosperity flowing directly from its command of a geographical choke point on a global scale. The safety it provided was a service it sold, and the caravans were willing customers. Its robust walls were not just a military feature, they were the guarantor of a contract, ensuring that the trade and the taxes it generated would continue uninterrupted for centuries. The silent, crumbling ruins that remained until a devastating earthquake in 2003 whisper a profound truth about medieval power. A stronghold could be the heart of a kingdom without controlling a single farm or village, its influence measured in the footprints of camels and the weight of silk bales. The real treasure was not hidden within its vaults, but in the dust of the road it so perfectly commanded. A dragon of stone and shadow guards the Carpathian passes. Corvin Castle, a Gothic Renaissance masterpiece rising from the rocky cliffs of Hunidora, was more than a noble residence. It was the sharpened tip of a spear pointed directly at the heart of the Ottoman advance. This fortress guarded the southern approaches into Transylvania, the vital gateway into Christian Europe. For the sultans in Constantinople, this castle and the man who ruled from it represented the single greatest obstacle to their expansion. That man was John Hunyadi, a commander of such legendary skill that his very name became a rallying cry. From this formidable stronghold, he orchestrated a decades-long defense that would define the fate of a continent. How does one family from one castle hold back the tide of an empire? The answer lay in a fusion of personal genius and architectural might. Corvin Castle was a self-sufficient military machine, with a high, narrow bridge that could be easily defended, towering pinnacles for archers, and a deep well secured within its inner courtyard to withstand any siege. But its true strength was its master. John Hunyadi was not a king by birth, but a warrior who earned his influence through victory after victory in the field. He understood that a static defense was not enough. From his castle, he projected power, launching daring campaigns that struck deep into Ottoman-held territory. His most famous triumph came at the Siege of Belgrade in 1456, where his forces decisively routed the army of Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror, the very same leader who had taken Constantinople just 3 years prior. This victory did not just save a city, it shattered the myth of Ottoman invincibility and halted their European advance for a full 70 years. The castle was the anchor that made this possible, the secure base from which Hunyadi could marshal his resources and plan his offensives. Its enduring presence on the frontier was a constant, tangible symbol of resistance, proving that the balance of power between empires could hinge on the strength of a single border keep and the unwavering will of the family that called it home. The sea holds no loyalty, a truth carved into the cliffs of Northern Ireland where the ruins of Dunluce Castle cling to a crumbling edge. This was the fortress of the MacDonald clan, a family whose power was written not on land but on the waves. Their stronghold was a coastal watchtower of the most dramatic kind, its foundations planted on a basalt outcrop that nature itself was slowly reclaiming. From this windswept perch, the MacDonalds commanded a panoramic view of the sea lanes connecting Ireland to Scotland. These were not just routes for trade, but the very lifeblood of their Gaelic lordship. Control here meant they could regulate the merchant ships that passed, but their influence ran deeper and darker. The clan's prosperity was famously bolstered by a more aggressive form of taxation, piracy. They could swoop down on unsuspecting vessels, their castle providing a perfect, hidden base for swift galleys to launch and disappear. This precarious existence, balanced between legitimate rule and outright raiding, defined their world. The castle's own physical state tells the final chapter of this story. In the 17th century, part of the kitchen complex, along with the staff working inside, catastrophically collapsed into the churning sea below. This was not a slow decay, but a sudden, violent amputation. The event serves as a powerful metaphor for the fate of the Gaelic lordships themselves. Their power was as formidable as the cliffs they built upon, yet it was also fundamentally vulnerable, eroded by the very forces it sought to command. Dunluce stands as a stark memorial to a specific kind of power, one entirely dependent on a coastline that could both empower and destroy. The silent stones ask us how many other fortresses, and the kingdoms they protected, were ultimately betrayed by the ground beneath their feet. A castle that seems sculpted from the clouds themselves, St. Hilarion Castle drapes across the peaks of the Kyrenia range like a stone veil. This is the stuff of fairy tales, with towers that pierce the sky and ruins that cling to impossible precipices. But its beauty was a weapon, disguising one of the most formidable defensive systems of the medieval Mediterranean. For the Byzantine Empire, and later for the Lusignan kings who ruled Cyprus, this mountain fortress was the master key to the entire island. Its strategic genius was its vertical design, a series of 3 fortified levels stacked one above the other up the steep mountainside. An attacking army would face a nightmare. After struggling to secure the lower gate, they would be forced uphill under a constant rain of arrows and rocks, only to confront another, even stronger wall. And then another. Each level was a self-contained bastion, meaning the loss of one did not guarantee the fall of the next. It was a defensive puzzle that exhausted and bled an invader long before they ever reached the summit. This command over the mountain passes was absolute. From its highest towers, the garrison could monitor every movement on the road from the coastal ports to the inland plains. He who held St. Hilarion decided who entered the heart of the kingdom and who was turned back at the gate. This power was put to the ultimate test during the Genos invasion of the 14th century. While the island seemed to fall around her, Queen Elena of Aragon made this castle her final redoubt. Her defiant stand within these layered walls transformed St. Hilarion from a military asset into a potent symbol. It became the unyielding heart of Cypriot resistance, a beacon of hope that the kingdom could survive even when its coasts were overrun. But its influence was not only directed outward. In the intricate and often deadly power struggles within the Lusignan court, control of St. Hilarion was often the decisive factor. A prince or noble who commanded its garrison held the high ground both literally and politically over every rival on the island. The fortress was a constant, silent arbiter of Cypriot destiny, its stone walls quietly shaping the fate of kings. From the precarious cliffs of Dunluce to the cloud-kissed towers of St. Hilarion, a single, powerful logic emerges. These diverse fortresses, scattered across continents and centuries, were all playing the same grand strategic game. Their enduring influence was never just about thick walls or tall towers. It was about controlling something the world could not do without. Whether it was the tin trade at Tintagel, the salt of Hohensalzburg, or the silk road at Bam, each stronghold mastered a critical resource. They clamped down on the vital arteries of medieval life, the mountain passes, the river crossings, the caravan trails, and the sea lanes. If you controlled the only bridge for 50 miles, you did not just own a piece of stone. You held the key to all movement and commerce in the region. This is why their locations seem so extreme to us today, perched on inaccessible rocks or carved into cliff faces. Comfort was always sacrificed for security. A lord would rather shiver in a windswept citadel than sleep comfortably in a valley where an enemy could easily surround him. The most successful strongholds achieved a perfect marriage between the raw power of nature and the sharpened intellect of human design. Château Gaillard's revolutionary walls were nothing without the Seine River flowing below, just as the killing maze of Heimji Castle would be less potent on an open plain. When you learn to see this pattern, the entire medieval landscape transforms. A lonely hilltop is no longer just a scenic view, it is a potential command post. A bend in a river is not merely a pretty curve, it is a natural choke point. Every strategic piece of geography tells a silent, enduring story of ambition, fear, and the relentless human drive to control the board upon which history is written.